Hello everybody, this is James Diboe on Season 3 on Discovering on Big Condo Online, and today we got a special guest in the house today, Mr. Lawrence Westgaph. How you doing, Lawrence?
Good to see you, James.
Finally we got you on anyway. I know you're busy, man, and you got a lot of things going on, but welcome to the show anyway.
Thank you, brother. It's an honor to be here, man.
Most definitely, and appreciate you being here. And also, let's deal with the timeline of you obviously you have a PhD.
Well, I'm working on it.
You're working on it, yeah. But you've got a long history anyway. So in the beginning, when we're dealing with Black history, Lawrence, you growing up as a child, I mean, what was the first things you encountered about Black history?
I grew up in a household that was so pro-Black. Wow. I can't really emphasize just what it was. It was my nan and my mother were both really involved in the struggle here in Liverpool from as long as I can remember. So I remember one of the things that politicized me was going to a Liverpool Black organisation, LBO, as some people will know it. My first meeting I went in 1980. I was 5 years of age. Wow. And then I went on my first march that same year, shout Maggie, 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 out, out, out. This before the riots. Yeah. And that's kind of where it comes from with me. So my nan, she comes from a long, a Black family who've been in Liverpool for over 200 years. 200 years. Yeah. And she was very much a community stalwart. So she was the first treasurer of the Liverpool Black organisation when that was established. And she was very much kind of in the vanguard, I would say, of that struggle throughout the 20th century. She was born in 1922. And I remember old seamen coming to the house and she'd hold court around the kitchen table. You know, people would leave their money with her while they went away. That was all part of that was one of the things my nan did throughout that period. So even though she was an old woman by the time this was happening, people still had that respect for her. Yeah. So I grew up in a household like that. My great-grandmother was involved in the 1919 riots. And she actually shot a man who broke into one of their houses. Because, again, this was when white mobs were going around attacking Black people. Exactly what you saw in places like Tulsa in 1921 or in Rosewood in 1919. That same kind of thing happened here in Liverpool. Okay. So you've got all these men coming back from the First World War, demobbed, haven't got any jobs. And then they see Black people, affluent Black people living in Liverpool, and they decided not having any of that. So they went and attacked their houses. And my great-grandmother, she had a number of boarding houses, because in those days there were signs saying no Blacks, no dogs, no Irish. So these were people who were my not just my family, lots of Black families in Liverpool would provide accommodation for people who couldn't get accommodation elsewhere. So they became quite affluent. And one of their houses, a house in Chester Street, if I remember correctly, was the house that was attacked by this man who broke in through the window and she shot him. He's supposed to have walked with a limp ever since. So I grew up, even though I never met my great-grandmother, I grew up in a militantly Black household. So there was always Black books in the house. I remember we had a picture of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Elijah Muhammad, all on the wall. So I was always asking those questions. Well, who are these people? Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Why? Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? So I kind of grew up in that kind of household. Nina Simone on being played, Ella Fitzgerald, all these Black people who were positive and, provided a lot of succor or support for kind of Black issues, going right back to, as I say, before I was even born. So that's kind of the household that I grew up with, and that's kind of influenced my outlook on life, my politics, my activism, and just my overall, the way I see the world. It's very much from that kind of perspective. Yeah. A Black feminist, because it was all women in the household. These were the ones who were, strong Black women were the ones who raised me. So that's kind of how I see the world, even to this day. Yeah.
So see, a lot of the names, people born in America, for example, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Elijah Muhammad. So see, with America, I mean, what would you say their influence on people like yourself, myself, or just us in general, if you're going back into history? I mean, what was it like when Malcolm X, I know he's born before our time and that, but from what you've researched yourself, what would you say influenced us as Black people in the UK?
Well, what I would say is these are English-speaking people. Yeah, well, true. So they also, in the media, it's the dominant discourse. The American model seems to be the one that most people hear about. Yeah. But these are the ones, because they were living in societies where they were in the minority, it's very easy for people from our background to identify with those same types of struggles, because that's exactly what we see. It might be different, but it's still the same in many ways. And so that's kind of where I think my family identified with that, because they see a similar struggle being had in these being black in these very white societies, you know, their reactions are kind of the same. So there's issues around black business, black education. These are all the things that were promoted by people like Malcolm and Martin. And that was very much what I got in my household, primarily because of the family that I come from. But obviously, over that, you've got these important figures who were promoting that as the way, you know, black excellence is through education, you know, or by establishing business and doing for self, not looking to other people. Do you know what I mean? That is something else that I think that militantly stand up on you know, pull yourself by your own bootstraps is something that I've certainly identified with as well.
So as far as education, when you first, after you left school and you were going to university, so how did you end up, did you already know when you were in school what you were going to be doing?
No, I didn't. But what I did do is I kind of always wanted to, like, I was always interested in black business. Okay. And that came from seeing what my nan did, but also from like looking to people like Malcolm, you know, and how Malcolm would say, don't beg the white man for anything. You know, if you want it, you do it for yourself. Malcolm was really the most important figure, the most important male figure in my life. Although he was dead before I was even born, that black manhood as a...
I have to agree with that. I mean, I love Martin Luther King, amazing man, but I just felt that it's do for self, you know, for our people, you know.
Absolutely. And so for me, that was kind of like, that was my model. So I read the autobiography of Malcolm X when I was 12. And I read loads of his speeches. So Pathfinder, the Pathfinder books, all the books of his speeches. This was in the days before when it was difficult to get tapes and stuff like that. And you didn't have the internet. Oh yeah. So this is where I really got my, you know, where I got my grounding from. I remember going to buy By Any Means Necessary in progressive books on Berry Street when I was 30, 1988. That was when Steve Mumby used to run the shop. Steve Mumby's a local councillor in Liverpool to this day. So it was very much Malcolm's model that I kind of like aspired to. Do you know what I mean? This idea of militantly do for yourself, don't rely on anybody else, and don't beg anybody for anything that you need. Go out and get it, you know, by any means necessary.
That's it. I mean, when I first watched the Malcolm X movie when I think it was about 94, I become a Muslim at the time. Now, I didn't last. It was like a phase, but it was there. Understand the black side of Islam, you know, because we just see it. Well, what we get fed anyway, it's Arabic, and that's it. But Malcolm X was aware of Islam having its roots in West Africa, you know. So these are very important things as well. Also, so when you first started to get your degree, I want to go from when you entered university. Okay,
well, I went to university later in life. So I'd set up my own business by the time I went to university.
Okay.
So I was already... So
I skipped the timeline. Have I jumped a bit?
Well, a little bit.
Take me a bit back if you want, like.
No, you're good.
Okay.
You know, but I kind of, in my early 20s, I bought my first house when I was 21.
Excellent.
So that was kind of like, because I grew up in that was what you did. Because my nan told me that's what you did. Do you know what I mean? So that was something that I understood, that property is power. Do you know what I mean? In a society that's a capitalist society, you know, to own land is a positive thing, and that's what freed me up.
Yeah.
So like, I've never really had to have a 9 to 5.
Good.
Do you know what I mean? There's never been a time when I've worked for someone.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's been
better.
Well, for me, it worked.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not saying that it doesn't work for that doesn't work for other people, but for me, because I've got so many interests.
Yeah.
You know, it worked for me to be able to supplement my income in ways that didn't take up all my time.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So that allowed me then to go and do my masters, for example, you know, which I did when I was about 30. So, and then, you know, from there I've gone on to kind of do my PhD along with doing all my research and doing all the media stuff that I've done. So I went to, like, after I bought my first house when I was 21. That was right about the time that I went to Ghana. And it was really like going to Ghana and going to Elmina Castle, Cape Coast Castle, Takoradi, a lot of different places in Ghana that really grounded me in why I needed to understand how slavery and the slave trade had shaped the modern world. Do you know what I'm saying? And it was really, although I had a grounding because I'd read a lot of books about the history of Liverpool.
But going there just, you know, that was, and it was a man called Tony Phillips who was at Radio 4 at the time. That's why we went there to make a radio program looking at like the links between Liverpool as the capital of the slave trade in Europe
and its connections to Ghana.
Wow.
You know, and that was kind of what like changed it all. That was a game changer for me.
Excellent.
And I got a lot of opportunities off the back of that. And that's really what grounded me in my particular area of expertise and research, which is the history of the black presence in Liverpool, and also the history of the slave trade and how the slave trade helped to shape the modern world in so many different ways that most people don't understand, and certainly not people from our background, you know. And I think it's really important as a black person living in the West, in a time when, well, it's not just in this time, but most times black people are made to feel foreign. And yet, when you look at the history of black people in the diaspora, we've probably done as much as any people to grow the West.
Definitely.
You know? So I take a lot of, for example, first generation black kids from London whose parents were not necessarily born here, but they are. And a lot of them tell me, you know, how they don't feel like they belong. And I say, listen, you know, although your parents and your ancestors may not have been in Britain, they contributed as much as anywhere to the development of Britain, because it was the Caribbean and the sugar during the 18th century that was one of the prime contributors to the British economy. Yeah. You know, George III said that we have to protect the sugar islands at all costs, because it was the money that was coming in from sugar that was allowing the British to fight the wars against the French. And it was exactly the same for the French in Haiti.
Yeah.
You know, so you can't tell me people of African descent have not contributed to the development and growth of the societies that we all live in, simply because they may not have been here, you know, 100 years ago. Because their ancestors, that money wasn't going to build Jamaica. That money was going to build the eastern seaboard of South America, place like Guyana, which I know you have a connection to. All that money was being extracted and being brought back here.
That's right.
And going into the development of the city of London and all the financial institutions there, and nowhere more so than Liverpool.
Well, that's also when you said you went to Ghana. I like to hear things like that as well, especially when people are researching. You go and fade out, because you got to see it from the other side of the ocean, you know, because we can hear it from this side or from America. But because when I went to Gambia, I went to see the Roots tour, Kunta Kinte, and this was like 2014, but I got really angry, really emotional. And it was not until they were saying to me that, look, you know, this is not like, you know, it's, don't just see the negativity of everything. You know, it's like we have a long history to explain about the Mansa Musa times, because it's under the Malian Empire, Songhai. And these are all like things that help me, like, you know what, feel more freer, because it could be a very negative topic. But a man like yourself understand it differently than your average person. So that's why it's always important to have a man like yourself explaining it, because some people don't understand the slave trade. They think they took slave. You're taking well-educated people, the best people. This is what I'm saying. So that's why I really appreciate, and I definitely need to come on one of your walks.
Welcome anytime.
You know, definitely, this is something that I've been waiting to do. I don't know how to go about it, Eventbrite, but I'll just come and speak to you, the man himself.
Yeah, man. Well, we have a Facebook group called Liverpool and Slavery. Yep. We advertise the walks on there. If you go on Eventbrite, we've got a page called Liverpool and Slavery. If you follow me on there, anytime we put up a walk.
Oh, that's easy if I can follow you on there.
Yeah, and then anytime a walk goes up, you'll get notified, and, you know, just click and come along. All the walks are free. If you want to make a donation, you can make a donation, but this is really about getting the knowledge out there. It's not about making money. And for me, it's really important, particularly for people of colour, but for everyone, to understand, you know, the key role that Africans played in the development of cities like Liverpool and Britain in general. Yeah. You know, you can use Liverpool you can use the local here in Liverpool to tell these global stories about why we live in the 5th largest economy in the world. You know, that doesn't happen by accident. In a nation as small as ours, with very little natural resources, we've got coal and we've got a bit of tin. How did this country become so fabulously wealthy?
Is the tin from Cornwall?
Yeah, the tin's from Cornwall.
Yeah. I heard about the Phoenicians going there years ago.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So that's what we've got here, but yet it's so wealthy, and that's because they extracted wealth from everywhere else. That's the reason why Britain wanted colonies. It wasn't to civilize the savage hordes. It was because they wanted their dough. They wanted all the natural resources, you know, all those goods that were then brought back to Britain, manufactured and made into goods, and then sent back around the world. You know, that's how they made their money. Yep. But the people who need to hear this information the most are probably the least equipped with it. So when you say that response to slavery, you know, I take the word of Diboe. Diboe says that was the most magnificent episode in 1,000 years. You know, the history of that, You know, and when he's talking about magnificence, he's talking about in the true meaning of the word, as in great. It was a massive story. Do you know what I mean? And it is a massive story because it shaped the West. You don't have the United States without slavery. You know, the wealth that the United States has, you do not have that without 4 million enslaved people toiling for nothing.
Definitely.
For you know, almost 200 years, really. You know, if you're talking about the British colonies and then the United States, all that wealth went into the development of their economy.
Yeah.
You know, and lots of the banks, lots of the financial institutions that still survive, both in America and right here in Britain, owe their origins to wealth accrued through slavery. But most of us don't understand that.
Also, could you elaborate on, you know, a lot of, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning where about no blacks, no Irish, no dogs and that one. Some people try and compare our struggle to the Irish. I mean, like, struggle, but I don't see it the same. It's the same as in oppression, but it's not the same as how you, because an Irish person to this day, you could just walk past, you don't know he's Irish, you don't know if he's English, he's Scottish or whatever. I mean, what do you think on that?
Well, I mean, I can identify that there's similarities. Well, no, there's similarities, but then there's a massive differences as well. So the Irish were not enslaved; they were indentured for a period of years,
like Indians.
They went over to Barbados. Some of them, a lot of them were like people who fought, were like freedom fighters in Ireland. During the occupation, because that was Britain's first colony, was Ireland, and the Irish fought against it, and some of them end up getting transported. But although many Irish people went to Barbados and other Caribbean colonies, some of them left after their indentureship was over. Others end up owning plantations with enslaved people on it. So there is similarities, but it's also very different, you know. And the Irish, you know, the Irish could become white, if that makes sense. The Irish weren't seen as being white, but they became white eventually, because once it became more important to ensure that you were dominating the black people, then obviously anyone else who shares your characteristics, then you bring them into your club. And that's the history of the United States of America.
Also India, the ones who brought up to India.
Of course, Well, I mean, they come later, and that was a Liverpool man who was really behind that. A man called John Gladstone, who was the father of William Ewart Gladstone. He's the great pioneer of the importation of indentured Indian labour after slavery was abolished. Because he didn't want to pay his former enslaved workers. He'd rather bring over Indians and indentured them, and that's the reason why you have people of Indian descent in the Caribbean, most notably Trinidad, Guyana. Same with the Chinese as well. That's how the Chinese get there. It's the Booker family. If you would have heard the Booker Prize, the most prestigious British literary prize, that's named after a family who were involved in slavery in Guyana. You know, and then they didn't believe that they could cultivate sugar profitably using a free labor force that you had to pay, so they brought over Chinese people. And that's why you have Chinese people in the Caribbean and also in Jamaica, in Guyana and also in Jamaica.
We'll see, like when we were saying about the Irish, well, then they could own property later on, they owned a lot. Well, the same with Indians, because if you look at Trinidad, Guyana, who's running all the businesses? And I've seen the same story in Fiji, because Indians were taken there in the 1800s, and it just seems like it's... Like, I have a talk with the people, the local people, and I say, like, you know, how come they're running everything? Even in Fiji, I'm talking about, and the people are just like, they just don't see no answer to nothing.
Well, I mean,
there's an answer.
But see, this is part of culture. You see, it's a cultural thing. So the Asians went to the Caribbean after slavery had been abolished, although many of them were in
1800s.
Yeah, well, after 1834. So they didn't have the same. There was. Africans, enslaved Africans, there were laws put in place to prevent them from owning property. Okay, these were all things that were part of the tradition of being enslaved. So you didn't come with that tradition. Whereas just like a lot of Asian people who come to Britain now, they come here with a plan. Do you know what I mean? They haven't just been plonked there. They've actively said, when they got on that plane, or in the old days, when they got on that ship, they were saying, I'm going over there because I know I can set up a business there and I can make money. You weren't plonked there as what I would say, as a consequence of being an enslaved person.
There's a way out.
Do you understand? Exactly. There was a way. There was a plan. You went there with a plan. You weren't just born there and you're like, oh, you know, this is life. You know, that's the difference. You got people, economic migrants. Enslaved Africans were not economic migrants. Do you understand what I'm saying? You're going over there thinking, we're going to make some money. We're going to set up a business and we're going to flourish. Whereas a lot of people who were in the Caribbean did not go there with that, with that idea in the head. And that's a lot of the reasons why you see certain groups of people being able to progress and dominate, because they go there with a structure and a plan, and it's within their culture, you know.
Like what you were saying before, before we come on the show, we was explaining about businesses, and like, for example, we have say you look at a Chinese restaurant, an Indian restaurant, they're looking for the people of this country, the majority people, to customers, you know. Where with us, we're always looking for, how come all the black people are not in here? It's business. Okay, you might have to change your style of food to cater for more people, and that's what you got to do. It's business, and it's not Uncle Tom, it's not this, and we need to get that in our heads.
Oh, totally.
Break that fear.
Well, that's part of our self-hatred. That's taught it into us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, why is it that you find, like, there's a lot of distrust, isn't there, between black people going into business together?
Oh, yeah.
You know, we all know the stories about how people will come here and club together. Do you know what I mean? And in order to do things. And what manifests itself most notably, especially in Liverpool now that you're seeing a large amount of refugee and immigrant communities coming from Africa.
Oh, yeah.
You see, they will immediately go and set up a business, because that's part of their culture. That's what they do. They come from a society where everyone's black and the shopkeepers are black. So that's what they do. Whereas the people in the diaspora, because our experience is different, that's not part of our culture. Do you understand? So it takes a much greater leap to envisage either yourself or the person that you know you grew up with. And certainly when it comes to patronizing them, it takes much more of a leap for you to be able to go, yeah, I'll do that, because that's not in your lived experience. But a Zairian or a Congolese person, when they come here, back home in Kinshasa, the people who own the businesses look like them. So it's not a great leap for them to be able to do it. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Totally.
And this is why it's really important to kind of understand the difference between being a black person in the diaspora and being a black person who comes directly from Africa. It's a different experience, because you've grown up in these societies where black people don't necessarily dominate.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Of course. And also the Africans that, my granddad coming from back, I think they were around about the World War II time, but after then, they came very poor. Where, say, some Africans are coming over with a bit of wealth now. It's a little different now. You know, but what I do love is the education that gets pushed by the
But that's what I'm saying to you, because a lot of these people are middle-class people.
Yeah.
A lot of these people coming over here university degrees, they're people who wouldn't choose to come here if their countries weren't being destabilised. It's exactly the same when you see with Syrians or Iranians or Iraqis. The people who can make it here are not the poor people. These are the ones who've got the ability, they've either got a passport or got the ability to raise enough money to be able to pay for an aeroplane flight. So straight away, you're getting those people who are part of the intelligentsia. What I did like, though, and this is why I come back to this theory about how Africans see themselves differently as people in the diaspora, those Africans who come over as your granddad's generation, they came here, immediately started buying up property, because that was part of their experience back home. So we'll club together. So these were people who we are descended from, but their experience was not centered in experiences in this country. They were sentenced in experiences back home. So they came here, and that's why you had so many social clubs that were established here in Liverpool: the Crew Club, the Nigerian Club, the Yoruba Club, the Igbo Club. These are all people who came here, could realise what would be a good idea to club together, pay subs. You know, this idea of going out with a begging bowl was anathema to them. Charity, that was not part of their experience. They were like, no, we'll put in money every week to allow us to be able to purchase a piece of property. We'll put in money every week so that we can have a social club, or we can provide ourselves with a burial club. These go back in Liverpool. These types of mechanisms go right back to the 19th century. The crew people of West Africa, you know, Sierra Leone, Liberia, they did that type of thing, because they, you know, as you're saying, they're seamen, so they're not here with the family. So if someone died here, they'd have money so that they could have a decent burial. Do you know what I mean? These were the types of things, and that's the beginning of community. Okay. So having these structures in place, that's why I go back and do this early research, because it shows you. Having these structures in place was something that was considered to be important to them at that time. I'd say that we've kind of lost that tradition, and the people who really lose out because of that are us and our children. Do you know what I mean? Because that idea of community is not something that we really value as much as we used to, and we lose a lot because of that.
So you see the Plaques. I wanted to discuss that as well. You know, I remember not long after George Floyd, I remember you set up a foundation for the Plaques, and you done really well. Congratulations anyway. And it really showed us that, you know, through not asking for funding, through raising the money yourself, it can be done. Absolutely. Just like it's always been done. But to this day, what we're in now, it's visible to a degree. I mean, how would you like? What do you think that we, as far as the, what would you best tell me a bit more about the plaques? As far as is it so many? How many plaques are we trying to cover?
Okay, there's two different initiatives that I'm involved in there. So we've got the Liverpool Slavery Heritage Plaques. They're being dedicated to the great Eric Scott Lynch, who kind of started the slavery. Well, he was one of the main early founders of the slavery walks. So they've been named in his honor. And they,
what year? Sorry.
Yeah, so he was doing them. Well, I think he did them as early as the late 1970s, as early as that. But he was certainly doing them throughout the 80s and into the 90s. So we've named these plaques after him, and these are plaques that are going to be put up in the streets of Liverpool because so many of our streets are named after slave traders. This will be a way of kind of highlighting this history for people who don't know that. Yeah. Because I think it's really important to understand in a city like Liverpool just how it's been shaped by the experience of the black diaspora. If any group of people have built this city, you know, you'll hear people say the Irish were very important in the foundation of this city. Well, of course you do, and they were. Yeah. They were, but you can't tell me that the wealth that built this city and all the fine buildings and made it a major metropolis came directly from the enslavement and exploitation of Africans and of Africa and Africans. That's why it became a place that people like the Irish wanted to migrate to, because there was jobs here, there was trade opportunities, but that all comes off the back of trade with the, as I say, with the Caribbean predominantly in the 18th century, and then the United States during the 19th century. It was cotton. Slave-produced cotton in the 19th century made Liverpool the gateway to empire, the single most important port in the British Empire. That's what made this place so important. And so those plaques are a kind of way of highlighting this early history. Yeah. Now, on top of that, the fundraising that we've been doing, because that's something that's being supported by the council, thankfully, off the back of what George Floyd, we've been asking for years. Yeah. But what happened last year? Although to be fair, I mean, I must be fair to the council. I gave a speech in the council chambers in January of 2020, and it was at that meeting that they agreed to put up the plaques. It's just when that happened with George Floyd, that put much more of a spotlight on that issue.
It wasn't January the 15th, was it?
I can't remember the exact date that I gave.
I remember they brought Renoka Rashidi, and you happened to be doing a talk in, I think, the town hall, though. Yeah,
exactly. That's exactly when it was. Amazing. Good one.
Yeah,
it was.
I've got good memory.
Yeah, because we were then in.
I was wondering where's Lawrence here, but then people saying.
In the Caribbean. Yeah. So that's why I wasn't there, unfortunately. But we also, the fundraising was for the Liverpool Enslaved Memorial Project. We've raised more than £55,000 for that project. Massive amounts of money. Amazing. Considering, and that's all been done by small donations. We had one large anonymous donation of £5,000, whoever that was, thank you very much, but we value the £2 that we get to the £5. We've raised lots of money from that, and that is to raise a memorial to the enslaved people who lived, died and were buried in Liverpool. For all the years that I've been doing my walks, I've been challenged by so many people saying no slaves came to Liverpool, blah, blah, blah. But again, I don't deal in conjecture. I only deal in facts. And I can provide primary evidence, slave sales in newspapers, burial records in the parish records of the churches of this city, and numerous other sources that show quite clearly that there's an enslaved population of people here in Liverpool, but they've been forgotten about. And there's 2 graveyards in the city centre where their bones still rest to this day, and yet there's no memorial there. There's memorials to people who've got no connection to those 2 locations. There's memorials to road traffic victims. There's memorials to people who died during the terrible AIDS epidemics in the 80s and 90s. There's a memorial to victims of the Holocaust. None of those people are actually buried in this site, but yet the enslaved people who are actually physically, their remains, their human remains still laying, those have no memorial whatsoever. So it seems quite fitting that we should have a memorial to those people there, which would highlight the fact that enslaved people were in Liverpool, highlight the fact that this long history of black settlement in Liverpool that goes right back to the beginning of the 18th century, at a time in this city when it wasn't a city, it was little more than a fishing hamlet. This is when Liverpool had a population of less than 10,000 people. Wow. There's been a black presence in this city since Liverpool had less than 10,000 people. So when you have these people give you this idea of what the prototypical Scouser looks like, you know, the Harry Enfield in it, you know, afro with the mustache, blah, blah, blah. I always say, well, you know, if black people have been in Liverpool since before it had a significant population, what does the quintessential Scouser look like? If black people have been a fixture of this city and its history for more than 300 years, like I say, when Liverpool had less than 10,000 people living here. Less than 10,000. Wow. That's how long there's been a black presence here. We are as much a part of this city as any of the other migrant groups who've come here. And everyone really to Liverpool is an immigrant, because as I say, going back to the 17th century, there was only 1,200 people here. 1650, there was 1,250 people in Liverpool. By 1800, by the beginning, but thanks to all the trade that came through here during the 18th century because of slavery and colonialism, Liverpool now has 80,000 people. And at that time, in 1800, that made Liverpool the second largest conurbation in the country. Only London had a larger population than Liverpool in 1800.
In 1800.
Yes.
So when we're going back, and there was only 10,000 people in Liverpool, about the 1800s, so 1700s?
Between 1720, Liverpool's population is 10,000 people.
Okay, so from that period, how many of them would be black people?
It's very difficult to say.
It might be a difficult question.
It's very difficult to say, but we know that they were here because parish records show clearly, and also there was runaway advertisements. What you find, right, although Liverpool only gets its first long-running newspaper in the 1750s, enslaved people in Liverpool were already objecting to their enslavement in the 1720s, because you find adverts for enslaved people running away in Liverpool in the London newspapers. Do you know what I mean? So there's been a black presence here, both free and enslaved. Not everyone here was enslaved. And what I would suggest is that the black presence in Liverpool mirrors the white presence. So black presence in Liverpool is socially stratified just the way the white presence is. So you find poor black people here just as you find poor white people, but you also find very affluent black people here as well, and everywhere in between. So you had artisans here, you had students here, you had people who were just running everyday businesses, boarding houses, working in shops. These are all the types of references that you find in the newspapers and in the parish records from that period, right on. You know, in Dickens comes here in the 1850s and goes to a black pub. All the punters were black, only the women were white in the pub. Even the landlord was black. And he goes in there and he says it was the best time of the night that he had, and he had the best looking women he saw in this pub. Do you know what I mean? And so if black people are there running their own businesses in the 1850s, why don't we know about these stories? They're all there in the archive, but we don't learn about them because obviously we have this very monochrome idea, this very white idea of what life was like in this country during the 18th and 19th centuries. That is not the case. Once Britain starts to get empire, people of all colours can be found in these major cities around the country.
It's like, I look at like culture, if I look at culture anywhere around the world, I kind of see like England, the cultures, they don't have a strong culture compared to other places in the world. But what made me think of, considering they don't have a lot of culture, but they win the culture war around the world. And when I say the culture war, I mean the spiritual war, cultural war. Because if we need to win the culture war, I mean, like, we're not just the fact because we're the first people, and not just because of that, but we have so much culture as black people wherever we are. A lot. We brought civilization to India, and China, and Europe, and we can go way back. So it's like our culture, it's too many. It's like it's not important. And sort of what you just said before, taking on this Western mentality.
Totally. I mean, it's you talk about the British not having a culture. Their language is so strong.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, it's really language that melds people together. Totally. It's not skin color, is it?
No,
definitely not. It's that idea of language and the strong idea of what it means to be British.
Yeah.
Although when you say, culture, you can't even think what is British food? Usually you can associate most strong cultures you associate with, like, at least they have a national dish.
That's right.
If you say our national dish is fish and chips,
I have to think about it.
Do you know what I mean? Well, that came here through the Jews of Portugal, blah blah blah. You can't. It's very difficult. But the British culture is in its language and what it's done around the world in terms of its warmongering.
Totally.
That's just a fact.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
It is.
And even when you look at the history of this country, it only becomes a world power much later than most of the other European nations. But then it becomes the dominant world power. So the Dutch were much more prominent in the world before the British were. The Portuguese and the Spanish certainly were, and even the French. The British.
French.
Yeah, the British come in a bit later than everyone else. But look at what they're able to do because of the power of their language.
That's it.
But what I have to agree with is when you talk about how people of colour, black people, have kind of shaped so much of world history. Yeah. But it's because the people who who are telling these stories or should be telling these stories aren't in places like academia. They're not on the TV. These histories, like, you know, and again, you don't have to go too far. I remember telling someone that Alexander Dumas, a white guy, that Alexander Dumas was black. He just would not have it.
Yeah,
I mean, he would not have. I won't name him. He would not have it. I remember talking to him about Pushkin being
Alexander Pushkin.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Amazing.
You know, these people who are these are people who are in Europe. Do you know what I mean? And these are people who are important figures in the cultural history of Europe. And yet, because of the way racism shapes itself, you just cannot believe that people of color could have been so prominent in these European nations from this recent period.
Yeah.
So when you go back into antiquity, it's even more difficult for them to understand that. Do you know what I mean? And you see that in the way it's articulated in films like what was that film about Egypt? Gods of Egypt, was it, or something? Do you know what I mean? And everyone is depicted as a European.
Oh, this silliness.
It's bizarre.
Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. That's the strength of the kind of the racialization of history, you know, and because we don't have enough historians, and I do understand why, you know, we lost the great Runoko Rashidi, sadly.
Rest in peace. Definitely.
But we don't have enough of those types of people who are really highlighting this history and contextualizing it. It's important to contextualize it, and that's where I really struggle. I think we need to go more into academia. We need to be more rigorous in the sources that we use.
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing that people use to criticize us, is that our source materials, and and this is, you know, and this
true.
And like I said, because I do all this archival research, I know we don't have to go out on great leaps because the evidence is there. You just have to be patient and be willing to look for it. It's not just as easy as doing a Google search.
Oh yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
And you know, because you go and say it, you'll get up, spend your money, get on a flight, travel 12, 13, 15, 24 hours, go there and do. That's what it takes.
It's what it takes.
And a lot of us aren't willing to make that sacrifice.
Even like when it's some people, like, where I've tried to get people to come on some of these trips. I've had a few people, but it's difficult. Like, I'd just rather go on the beach. I'd rather go to a club. I'd rather do this. And like, why do you want to go 7 hours? Why do you want to sit in the bus and see these tribes? And it's very hard. Sometimes you feel like a lonely person in this. I bet you yourself, Lawrence, mainly for you must feel like a lonely research. Even though there's people there that are back here listening to you, but when you're alone, you're sitting there researching. I know them thoughts pop up in your head because it pops up in mine.
Brother, I do, like I say, I spend a lot of time in dark, dingy rooms looking at microfilm. I bust up my eyes doing that on them microfilm machines for decades, for years.
It make you feel alien sometimes.
But what I'm saying to you is all the people who we value, they go through that struggle. Sadly, we put too much emphasis on sports stars or actors. But to hone any craft, you have to put in lonely hours by yourself, and we celebrate that. But what it is about, from our, and this is a brother to brother type of conversation, is our people tend to value the things that have the least nutritional value.
That's so true.
Do you understand? Like, I know if I do research, and you'll know through travel, like, those are transferable skills, bro. Yeah. It's not like learning how to sing, where you can be a great singer, but that's all you can do. If I learn how to utilize research, if I learn how to, go through and document things correctly, that's something that I can transfer into any arena. Whereas we tend to emphasize and put real value on singers, on dancers, on footballers, on sportsmen, sportswomen. But those are the most limiting of roles. Do you know what I mean?
Too much attention. It's getting
brother. It's far too much. And then you get thousands of people. Like, you got to understand as well. Like, if you're a sports person or a singer, the better you are at it, the narrower the field gets until that one person gets there, or the 11 on the football team, or the 15 with your subs. Let's say it gets narrower. So you can be the better and better you get at it, the more they chop away. And then all those people who've been chopped away are left on the wayside. Like, well, what do I do now? Some of them may choose to become physiotherapists. Yeah. But come on, man, these are skills that are so specialist that most people do not get a career out of it. So then they have to go and find something else to do after devoting thousands and thousands of hours to kicking a ball or bouncing a ball or singing. Do you know what I mean? Whereas the skills that are transferable, that widen your opportunities, like I say, doing maths, doing your English, your languages, all these things that add so much to your mental capacity. Yeah. They're the things that we don't value. Yet that is the opposite. Whereas the sports and entertainment industry gets narrowed, the more skills you acquire of the more cerebral nature, they open up more and more avenues. Okay, I wanted to become a lawyer. I didn't do that. But now I'm working in sociology, or I'm working in another field. Because all those skills that you learn you can then apply to other areas.
Yeah.
Whereas these specialist areas and millions of us go into it, knowing that only one's going to make it. You know, if you've got 23 Ronaldos, only 22 of them can get a job. Do you know what I mean? There's a finite amount of opportunities for, you know, if you've got a football team, you've got to fill it, and let's say you have 11 alternates, and you've still got another great player, you have to say, sorry, mate, there's no role for you. Do you know what I mean? You've got to go out and find another team. These are the types of, we're going for opportunities that are the equivalent to winning the lottery.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Definitely.
It's ridiculous. Do you know what I'm saying? And yet we will put so much into that. And the best way in my own community, Liverpool 8, where I've grown up my entire life, I know lots of people who set up football clubs. I don't know anyone who set up an after-school educational club. Do you know what I mean? I know lots of fathers who will take their kids every Saturday, Sunday morning to go and play footy, but wouldn't dream of taking them every Saturday and Sunday afternoon to go and learn about their own history or learn about maths or education or anything it may be. And that's where I think we really... And we're the only people who do it.
Yeah.
The Yemenis teach their kids about their history. The Chinese teach their kids about their history. But people in the diaspora, we seem to value other things over our own, you know, our own history and our own struggle, and that's why I think we lack.
That is definitely true. It is why we lack. You know, it's priorities not being put first, like you were saying about the Africans that come here. You know, they come for education. You know, their parents, they say, oh, they're very strict, but no, they're not strict. They're making sure they get educated and get a good job. And
what did Malcolm X say? Education is the passport to the future.
That's right. It is.
Do you understand?
Totally
That's the key. Not playing football, bro. You know, as much as I love sports, my knees will tell you. But, you know, I understand that isn't the way that you grow a people. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, sport, you can watch your sport, whatever, fair enough, but it doesn't deserve that much attention.
Not from the everyday people. And don't get me wrong, you know, I love Muhammad Ali. We've got one Muhammad Ali. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, the sports route is not going to grow us as a people. It's going to be all those other routes. Why is it that I know more Premiership footballers than I do black doctors? I know more black Premiership footballers than I do black doctors. Why is it more exceptional to be a doctor than to be someone who's earning multi-million pounds kicking a ball as a black person? Something's wrong. Something's rotten in Denmark.
and you know what I'd say to that also? It's not like it'd be great if like all these black sportsmen came together and built something. But there's solely individuals. It's just individuals, so it's not really any use to our community.
There's some of them who do good. I mean, even in our community, Trent Alexander-Arnold, man, he's a positive man, and respect to him. And I'm so glad that he's made it. Do you understand? But for every one Trent, there's thousands that didn't make it.
That's
do you know what I'm saying? That's the key. So you do find some who will contribute and will give back and aren't just all self-centered. Do you know what I mean? And he's one of those ones, and I salute him. But what I'm saying, and it's not taken away from success. It's not saying don't push your children's dreams. But just like every other people, we must have a fallback. Do you know what I mean? And we don't seem to have that fallback. I know lots of people who were great footballers but didn't make it. You know, but they put all their eggs in one basket, and you can't do that, especially with something as I wouldn't say abnormal, but as exceptional as being a footballer. That should not be what we're aiming for. We should be aiming for success in the classroom, because that's how you build a nation. That's how you build all the other, you know, you can't live, if you don't have a society if you have societies where everyone's a footballer but you got no doctors, your society's not going to stand, is it?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? You can't do for self if everyone's playing sport. And at the end of the day, the way I look at it is this: the sportsmen and the they're entertainers, aren't they?
That's it.
You don't need entertainers in a successful society.
You don't.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Right, yeah.
And I appreciate the arts and I appreciate sport and all that, but societies can function without them. They can't function without doctors. They can't function without nurses. They can't function without street sweepers. You know, people who take up all the necessaries and essentials of life, they're the ones who we need, but yet we seem to be aiming for these most fantastical routes out of poverty that don't really have an intrinsic benefit to society. They may have an additional benefit, but an intrinsic benefit to society is a healer. Do you know what I mean? Someone, you know, or someone who can feed people, you know, a farmer. These are the things that have that intrinsic benefit to society. And yet we don't focus on them. We focus on being a rapper. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it is. And after time, when you do want to be a rapper, they don't want to be this conscious rapper.
Of course.
You
Well,
just want to be like the
what sells
negative
now,
rapper.
brother.
That's what sells, isn't it?
That's it. And like I say,
Yeah.
I appreciate there's an importance and a necessity for people to have these artistic skills, but it's not, the Asians don't worry about that, do they? I'm sure there's loads of Asian kids who are great artists or would make great footballers, but their kids are saying, no, their parents saying, no, you're not doing that. You're going and doing medicine. You're going and doing law. You're going and becoming a pharmacist. If you want to do that type of stuff, you can do that in your free time.
Yeah.
But I'm guaranteeing that you are going somewhere in your life.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Like
and
you
then,
said, if you don't make it, there's only so many Ronaldos or so
Exactly.
many, you might not get picked.
Exactly. And that's it.
And then what have you got to fall back on?
Exactly. How do you feed your family?
That's totally right.
And that for me is what we've got to kind of inculcate into our young people. First of all, you've got to feel like, I think we're another people who don't feel like we have to contribute to our society. And when I say our society, I don't mean society generally. I mean the black family. Do you understand?
Yeah,
that's where it begins. That's where it begins. And that's where you make your first and major contribution. And usually if you're doing that, outside of that area, everywhere else benefits because of that. Because your kids aren't going around, running around doing all kinds of foolishness. Because your commitment to your children is your first commitment to wider society.
Yeah.
That's where we need to start, and I would love to see all the black sports clubs saying, yeah, okay, your kid can come and play football, but how's he doing in school? How's she doing in school? If she doesn't do well, then I'm sorry, we have a policy. Don't care how great they are at kicking the ball. If they can't read or write, they can't play for this football team. Do you know what I mean? They're the types of things that I would like to see our football teams and kind of putting in there. It's not to take opportunity away from our children. It's encourage them to get themselves more opportunities.
I totally have to back that what you said 100% there. We know the people it's for the people like ourselves have a good talk, but that's definitely very important. That
totally, it's key.
It is a very, very important because
you see what people don't understand as well is like they think that without that they can still get on. Yeah. And I say you might as an individual, but if you're living in a community, right, where your kid's doing all right, but he's surrounded by kids that aren't doing all right, one, they're going to either have a negative influence on their life in terms of what they aspire to, because, so many of us are affected by peer pressure. Not all of us, but so many of us are. And then on top of that, things can happen to your kid, not because your kid's done anything wrong, but because those other kids aren't being nurtured in the same way. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So your kid might be lucky enough to have the new iPhone, but there's another kid who's poor, hasn't been brought up with any type of values but aspires to having that type of stuff, because everything tells me if you haven't got that, you're a bum. So we'll go and tax your kid. Yeah. And your kid might not come home that night. Do you know what I mean? So even though that's not your responsibility, because you're part of society, we have that African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. 100, yeah. That is so the truth. And the impact of that is not just felt by that individual or by that individual's parents. It has an impact on wider society. Yeah, it does. And that's how, we don't think like that, bro. We are very selfish in our thinking, and it's not about being a gossip. It's not about looking down your nose at other people's children, but it's being aware that if one child needs aren't being catered for, that can have an impact on your child. So if I want to make sure that my child's doing well, think about donating some time to working to make another child's life good. Do you know what I mean?
And also, parents should speak to parents.
Of course.
That's what, and that needs to be set up as well, because like you've just said, you might have a child and you brought them up very nice, good manners, everything, respect. But then his friends, some of them, they haven't been brought up with that same respect from their household. So it's like, well, how do they're the ones who are lost the most. So what would be the solution for those where education doesn't start in the home?
It's social structures.
Social structure.
So what I say is, okay, so for instance, we've got a group called the Liverpool Black Men's Group, which is open to everyone.
That's right.
We want black men to join that group so we can have these types of discussions amongst ourselves, because our women are tight. Our women are some of the strongest, most progressive women, and they've led this community for decades now.
Salute them.
Without them, totally 100%, like I say, and I don't think we'd necessarily be here in the shape that we are in now if it wasn't for those women. Do you know what I mean? And so the men need to step up.
100%.
And it means by getting together with other men and building stuff. The women have done it. Yeah. The women continue to do it. But it's now time for us to kind of go back and look at what we come from.
Exactly.
And take from that and kind of raise that up and lift that up and say, black men, come together. Let's develop X, Y, Z together as a group for mutual benefit.
All positive.
Everyone. It's how can anyone? There's nothing negative about
Nothing
that.
negative.
Do you know what I mean?
Can't go wrong there.
And you know, it's about saying to yourself, we know that we've had issues with self-hate. We know we've been indoctrinated to kind of envy
Western religion.
Do you know what I mean? Yeah, totally. Well, in many ways.
In many ways, yeah.
And envy what we see others doing and to tear that down. Crabs in the barrel, brother Marcus Garvey talked about, didn't he? You know, where we'll pull, see someone getting out.
And pull them down.
Do you know what I mean? Rather than thinking, well, if he gets out, he might put a hand down and help me out. That's what we need to do. We need to break that. And then create that situation where, like, yeah, we want to help each other out. Be willing to sacrifice. You know, if you don't tell me you love Malcolm X, who sacrificed his life when you can't even dig and put in your hand and take out a fiver.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Of course.
Do you know what I mean? And yet you look to these people.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, it just seems daft, doesn't it?
It does.
You know, we've got to be willing to do that. Everybody else does it. That's why the Yemenis have their centres. Do you know what I mean? That's why the Somalis have their centres. So if you're coming from the diaspora, I know we've had a different history. I know our history, what shapes us is a turbulent event. That's the thing that I think is probably most key, is that our culture has come out of this great tragedy. Do you know what I mean? And it affects us in so many different ways. We didn't just come here as economic migrants. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So I understand that. But once you're aware of that and you don't do something to address that, then you're just as culpable as anybody else. You're as culpable as the people who put you in that situation.
Totally.
Because you're just exacerbating it.
Yeah.
You know? And that's where I think we've got to get to. We've got to be willing to take each other's hand and say, this is not a good situation that we're in. Let's build together for the future.
And I think also what we need is we've got different people who do different things. Now, everyone can't do the same thing. You know, we all have our uniqueness, or we all have our own abilities, skills. But definitely we need to, I always push on this show all the time, the importance of African history.
Okay.
I mean, how important do you see it, Lawrence, as in knowing our history from pre-slavery also?
Listen.
And when we say pre-slavery, we could even talk about our history is still living. It's still living today in Africa, in certain places. It still lives, Haiti. But as far as like when we were living, great. I mean, how can we get back to that?
Well, listen, it goes back to, again, I come back to brother Malcolm X, who's probably my greatest hero. You know, he said, history is best qualified to reward all research. So for me, there's nothing new under the sun. If you want to see what we can become, you look at what we were.
Yeah.
And that goes right back to prehistory, as you're saying, you know, and taking it all in light. And, you know, I'm not the type of person who's naive enough to think that because someone was a king in Africa meant they were a good person.
Oh,
but what we take from that is that there's models in place to show that people of colour can rise up to these highest levels within societies.
Totally.
You know, and it's not just got to be, you know, like I say, I'm not a fan of monarchy in any of its forms, but all I want people to understand is black people have done stuff. Do you understand? We haven't always been on the lowest rungs of the social economic ladder, and our history clearly demonstrates that. So this isn't even about wishing. You know, they have the saying, build and they will come, because not everyone's a visionary. Some people can't envision it. They have to see it and then they subscribe to it. Our history allows you to do that. So you don't have to say, this is a new thing. It's not new. It's old. We did it in the past and we can do it again. Just look to the past to build for the future. So that's why I put, as a historian, as a trained historian, that's why I put history front and centre, because it allows you to already highlight all the great things that we've done in our long history. That's something that I don't think a lot of people really appreciate.
That was interesting there when you said just before, not a big fan of monarchy. And if you really think about it, it's hierarchy, isn't it? You know, when like, you want hierarchy. I mean, it'd be different if like it was your granddad who was the king or something. I mean, don't get me wrong, I did a 23andMe and he traced, you know, your ancestry. And what was interesting, and the first time I probably talked about this, I was speaking to Patrick about last time, Ramsey III is related to me through my father's line. And I was like, wow. That's the first time I've talked about that. I was showing Patrick, he was shocked last time. But now my fatherland, Nigerian. Ramsey III is in Egypt, but I know that we know there's a connection with West Africa. You can go to them all, the Dogon connection to Kemet, the Yoruba connection. So people think Africans just kept still. You know, I think one time we were having this conversation about people not believing Africans have the ability to navigate. How did you get to Madagascar?
Brother, Egypt, even Egypt was colonized from the interior.
Totally.
You know, all those cattle cults that you see in Egypt, they're all in Central Africa, going back to prehistory. Yeah. So yeah, you know, this idea that people have, like, you know, I mean, again, this is how people think about history. Do you know what I mean? On national lines, you know, nations are a new phenomenon. Humans have been around long before the nations existed. Do you know what I mean? And this idea, again, this is why we need to talk more about history.
Definitely.
This is why history needs to be put front and center.
Yeah.
And again, that's what I struggle with, that we value things that have no real nutritional value. And yet, man, you know, I know, you know, you'll have people who'll be able to tell you who played in the Liverpool team in 1962 in one particular match, but they won't even be able to tell you what the capital of Egypt is or the capital of Nigeria is. Yeah. That's how mashed up we are. Do you know what I mean? The things that we focus on and the things we prioritize are probably the things that have the least nutritional value. And then these things that can build you up as a human being, as an individual, can create a great sense of identity, which can... I mean, mental health is a big issue. I don't want to go into that now, but for me, like, the idea of me being very solid in my understanding of who I am as a black person, as for me, has been key. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Knowing that the barrage of negativity that you get fired towards you in your everyday life as a black person living in Western Europe, that's what keeps me safe mentally. And a lot of us don't make it, do we? A lot of us don't make it. We internalize all this trauma and it sends us round the bend. That's why there's disproportionate about to black men in mental health institutions. Do you know what I mean? It's issues like that. And I think history is a great medicine for that. Do you know what I mean? Knowing this knowledge of yourself, being proud, knowing that you've been able to achieve and have achieved against great odds. Fact that we survived slavery. Do you know what I mean? Many people didn't. Look at the Native Americans, you know, almost wiped out. Yeah. You know, the African, you know, was able to for whatever reason. That in itself, it's incredible.
It is unbelievable. Like, we're still here, we're still going, and like, I mean, we still got obviously a lot of work to do, but we're not doing too bad compared to what we've gone through.
It was yesterday, bro.
But we know we can. we know we can push it a lot further.
Totally. It was yesterday. That's what I'm saying. You know, if you think about slavery, if we're talking about chattel slavery, that ended less than 200 years ago. That's not even a blink in the eye in human history. If you're talking about in Brazil, that happened it ended in the 1880s. You know, I knew people who were born in the 1880s. That's how close slavery was. Do you know what I mean? So don't be telling me we should have forgotten about it.
Yeah.
Don't be telling me that. Just as you won't be telling Jewish people 100 years from now that they should have forgotten about the Holocaust. It's such an important event in the history of Europe. No. Never forget is what they say, and that's so true as far as I'm concerned. And I feel exactly the same about the African Holocaust, you know, slavery and the slave trade and the legacies of it. Never forget. It shaped the world that we live in today, created most of the modern financial institutions that shape our lives. Eric Williams, in his great work, Capitalism, Slavery, said, the Bank of England should not be called the Bank of England. It should be called the Bank of the West Indies, because so many of the early governors who founded that institution, that world-important institution, had made all their money in the Caribbean, in slave plantations. You know, this is what we're talking about. These are institutions that were set up then that still shape world policy today. And the value of the money in your pocket, they owe their origins to the enslavement of our ancestors.
Wow.
That's how key it is to the development of this nation.
Definitely. Well, you know, we'll come to the end of the show, but you know, we definitely got you. We've got another 2 minutes anyway, so we'll keep it going for the bit anyway. But it's very interesting, this conversation, you know, and I'm really happy that you came today. You know, I think I wanted to get you on season 1, and I think Chase changed the time or something, so, you know.
No problem.
But no problem. You're here anyway.
Yeah, I've got to support you, man.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that, because it's important that people like ourselves come together, and we've got to show, because there's so much different things. We've got a lot of work to do as black people. You 100%. know, we need a couple of more people in, you know, to be involved in this and that. It's
our institutions and organisations. Again, Liverpool, right? Because of what we were and the role that our community played in the struggle of black people in this country, we should be on a much more elevated level than we are. Paul Gilroy, the great Paul Gilroy, the academic, he said to me, 2009, he's in London, we used to look to the black community of Liverpool as the most militant and uncompromising black community in the country. That's how we were in the vanguard, you know. We were the ones who were setting up all these institutions, going down, militantly occupying buildings that were, you know, organisations that weren't doing what they should have been doing.
Yeah.
And that's the tradition that we come from. We just lost another one of our great ancestors. He's just gone to the ancestors last week. Well, in August, but he was buried on Wednesday, the great Alan Gale. These are the types of people whose shoulders we stand on. Do you know what I mean?
Definitely, yeah.
And we need to get back to that, and we need to remember this recent history and how important we were, like, to the black struggle in this country. It's something that's forgotten, and we've got to get back there. We need to be setting up organisations and institutions that are going to promote our history, promote politics within our community, all the positives that we need to present to our young people. We should be doing. They shouldn't be looking to rappers in America. They shouldn't be looking to footballers, whether here or elsewhere. They should be looking to their own community.
Definitely. What do you think on, like, you know, we were saying before about the begging bowl? What is the greatest use of the begging bowl? You just say we can't finance, or people do not put money in the pot. What can be the greatest thing with the fundings coming out of that, would you say?
It's us putting our own fingers in the pot. Putting our own fingers in our pockets and putting in. That way things happen regardless of what's going on outside. We should still take funding, but that's additional. Do you know what I mean? If you got a Christmas, if you've got a Christmas dinner, you got your turkey, and someone offers you another turkey, you say, yeah, thank you very much. But whether they give you that turkey or not, you're still going to eat. Do you know what I mean? That's where we're at. We're at a situation where our first go-to is, we'll ask for funding for that. And then if it doesn't happen, you don't get to do the activity. It should be opposite. We're going to raise money to do that, and we'll put in an application as well, and we'll do twice as much if we get the application. But if we don't get it, we know we're still going to be able to do stuff.
Bonus, isn't it?
That's how we need. It's that do for self mentality.
Do for self.
That is key.
Number one.
That's part of our tradition, bro. This begging bowl thing is a new phenomenon.
It's a new phenomenon.
It's a terrible phenomenon as far as I'm concerned. In the past, we always did for self. That's how we ended up with all those clubs on the Avenue and on Parliament Street and all the strong community institutions, because people were willing to put the hand in the pocket and take out their own money, you know, whatever that may be. And you can't tell me now that people were living better then than they are now. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And that's where we've got to get to. Trust each other and then be willing to do it. And that's how things change. That's
it. You know, hopefully anyway, we got more to go on in the show anyway. But, you know, I want to appreciate you today, Lawrence, anyway. You know, excellent conversation, and we've got more to go, but we're going to finish off on this one. You know, I'm discovering season 3, James Diboe, and Lawrence Westgaph. I want to thank you very much.
Thank you, brother.
And we'll do this again.